Hi, everybody. So we're going to wait just a few more minutes so we can start and let some more people join. So. Okay, hi everybody. Trying to be, of course, respectful of your time. Thank you for coming. Very glad that you did. So yeah, my name is Joey. I use he, him pronouns. And today we'll be doing a little LGBT education and a little bit of training. So yeah. glad to see you're all here. I hope it hasn't been too crazy a week already for you. The last week was a little bit crazy, so hopefully this week it's looking a little bit better. So, yeah. Okay. Awesome. So yeah, I'm here today. I'm representing the Center for Gender Equity. First, we're going to start off with some education. I'm sure a lot of you guys already know a lot of what I'm going to say, but I want to make sure, you know, that we all have the same base knowledge. Also, this is being recorded, by the way. I should mention that, just that way people in the future who couldn't make it to this meeting will be able to view this training as well. So, yeah, start with some basic education. Okay, so here's one acronym. It's a little long, I totally understand. I'm just going to go over each letter, do a brief description of it, and they'll be good for later in the presentation. We all have the same base knowledge. So yeah. So first, starting out with the L. The L in LGBT stands for lesbian, which is a woman who's primarily attracted to other women. G stands for gay, who is a man who's primarily attracted to other men, but it's also used as an umbrella term as a way to identify the community as well. Also, if you guys have any questions at any point, feel free to type them in the chat. There will also be a section after. There's 3 sections to this presentation. There will be a section for questions after each section, or a slide for questions. So yeah. Okay, next is the B, and that stands for bisexual, and that's an individual attracted to people of their own and opposite gender. At this point, bisexual is called a multi-gender attracted sexuality. Doesn't mean just, you're a man attracted to men and women. It's kind of used in a more general term. Next we have T, which stands for transgender. And those are a person whose gender identity differs from what they were assigned at birth. I'll go into a little bit more nuances about it in a couple slides. So next we have transsexual. This is a term that isn't really used anymore, but is seen sometimes. Sometimes it was definitely used more in a medical sense previously. I don't know if anybody really used this term as much anymore. Next we have queer. This is an umbrella term for people who have multiple identities underneath the LGBT umbrella. Some people identify just as queer, but also queer does have a past as being used as a slur. So not a word that you should maybe use to describe others, but we do use it in things like queer studies and terms like that. So just a little touchy subject. Next we have questioning. That's not a term that often is in the LGBT acronym, but it is something that sometimes is, and it's just somebody who isn't sure if they are part of the LGBT community yet or not. Yeah, next we have intersex. So intersex is an individual whose sexual anatomy and chromosomes do not fit with the traditional markers of male or female. Yeah, and so not always do intersex people want to be part of the LGBT community, but the LGBT community is always open to intersex people. Next is ally. These are people who support the LGBT community. So not always are these people also included in the acronym, but we always appreciate our allies. Next we have asexual. So this is a person who does not generally feel sexual attraction or desire. These people also are considered part of the LGBT community. Next we have pansexual, and it's a person who experiences sexual, romantic, or physical attraction to any person of any gender identity. This is very similar to bisexual. What we consider the difference, even though it doesn't really matter, is that when you are pansexual, then gender does not affect your attraction to people. So here's some terms that you guys might hear today. Number 1 being assigned gender at birth. So also known as AGAB. The G can be filled in with like female or male or intersex. These are just this is a gender category that was assigned to you as an infant at birth, and this is usually by a doctor. Next we have affirmed gender, and this is the gender that one currently identifies with regardless of their assigned gender at birth. So an example would be a transgender woman is someone who's assigned male at birth, but affirms a female gender. Next, we have misgender, and that is to misidentify a person's individual or a person or individual's gender. And this can be using the wrong gender pronouns for someone, as well as labeling with incorrect gender terms, i.e. using female slash, all these women associated words for a man. And the next we have dead name, and that's a name given to a transgender person at birth that they no longer use or identify with. Next, here's a two helpful charts about how to visualize the difference between gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, sexual attraction, and romantic attraction. I'll go over what makes these two different in just a moment. So if we look at the gender-bred person, we have this idea that gender identity goes from neutral to womanness or manness. Gender expression, which is how you present yourself. Gender identity is how you think about yourself. Gender expression is how you present yourself, goes from neutral to feminine or neutral to masculine. Biological sex is, what you were assigned at birth, goes from neutral to femaleness and neutral to maleness. Sexual attraction is who you're attracted to, that way. It goes from neutral to woman or femininity and neutral to masculinity. And then romantically attracted to someone you'd like to date goes from neutral to femininity and neutral to masculinity as well. If you look at the gender unicorn diagram, looks pretty similar. The only difference is that it does have a third line that kind of represents that, that there's no in between like manness and womanness that is, neutral as much as you can express your gender in any sense. The downside to the gender unicorn is it does have more of a assigned at birth that is just male, female, and other / intersex. That kind of is more limiting. So as I said, feel free to ask any questions that you might have about any of the information I'm giving you. So here are what we consider our umbrella terms and the terms that come underneath it for gender identity. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have cisgender.
Figure out what.
And underneath cisgender, we have cis woman and cis man. And this is identifying with the gender you were assigned with at birth. On the right side, we have the transgender umbrella. And on the right side of that umbrella, we have trans women and trans men. These are considered our binary trans people. And so people who transition to be part of the binary gender spectrum of man, woman. And on the left side of the transgender umbrella, we have non-binary. And these are people who identify outside the binary of man and female. So underneath that, we have genderqueer, gender fluid, bigender, and agender. And these are all simply different non-binary gender identities. Next, just a quick overview of pronouns. Oftentimes, the most common pronouns that we hear are she, her, they, them, and he, him. And these are pronouns that they use to identify yourself and identify others. And now is time for any questions. If you guys have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or you can either type them in the chat or you can just speak them out loud, unmute yourself and speak. So yeah, I'll give you a few minutes to think.
Could you go back to the slide with the umbrellas?
Can you say that one more time?
Could you go back to the slide with the umbrellas?
Yes, with the umbrellas, of course. Are we all good with the umbrella slide? Awesome.
I'm starting my video again.
Just a real quick question. I guess one of my biggest questions is how to use they, them properly in a sentence. and
Yes.
when I'm referring, because of my English in the back, as always, use they, them differently. So that would be interesting and helpful to know. Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. That's what we'll be covering next. So we'll totally go into that. I agree. I think that's something that's super important to cover. So yeah. So we had a question about bi-gender. So yeah, I'll go back to the slide with the non-binary umbrella, with the umbrellas. So yeah, underneath the non-binary umbrella, we have a couple different terms. Bi-gender is the idea that you identify as two genders at the same time. This does not just have to be like man and woman, but it can be like, oh, I identify as non-binary and a man at the same time. So does anybody else have any other questions about the genders underneath that? Does anybody want me to go over all the genders underneath that little umbrella? Of course, that's not an exhaustive list, but an idea. Okay, well, I think then we're probably good on questions and I'll move right along. Okay, so next we're going to be moving on to application. So basically taking the information that I just let you know and figuring out how we're going to apply that. So yeah, here we are on pronoun usage. So yeah, we have, sorry, this is kind of blurry. On the top chart, we have the traditional pronouns. Also above that, we have all the English lingo, you know, about how to use these words. And then underneath the traditional pronouns, we have the non-binary pronouns, which are pronouns that anybody can use, but are primarily used by gender non-conforming people. So on the top line, we have, for example, we have he laughed, I called him, his eyes gleam. That is his, and he likes himself. Very similar underneath that, we have she laughed, I called her, her eyes gleam, that is hers, she likes herself. Basically, these are all just examples of how we use these pronouns in our everyday language. So underneath that, we have 3 examples of different non-binary pronouns. This is in no way an exhaustive list, but is some of the most common that you'll see, they, them being the most common. So when you use they, them pronouns, I know it can seem kind of clunky and hard at first, but practice makes perfect, you know, that kind of age-old idea. So the idea is, like, instead of saying he laughed, we say they laughed. Instead of saying I called him, we say I called them. Instead of his eyes gleamed, we say their eyes gleam. Instead of saying that is his, we say that is theirs. And instead of saying he likes himself, we say they like themselves. And so, you know, like I said, can be kind of clunky and hard, but it's something that we use in our everyday life. It's just putting it into the frame of doing it for an individual. That can seem difficult, but it is something that we do all the time. You know, you always ask, like, oh, did you see who left their bag there? You know, oh, I didn't see Carl today. Did you see them? You know, it's something that we do instinctively, but it's hard when we think about it. So another set of pronouns is called spivak. That's basically just a fancy name for the person who made them, who is a mathematician. and also is referred to as like AM pronouns. So instead of saying she laughed, you say A laughed. Instead of saying I called her, you say I called M. Instead of saying her eyes gleam, you say air eyes gleamed. Instead of saying that is hers, you say that is airs. And instead of saying she likes herself, you say A likes himself. And very similarly, then we have ZZer or he, here pronouns. And those are pronounced, instead of saying he laughed, you say Z laughed. Instead of saying I called him, you say I called ear. Instead of saying his eyes gleam, you say here eyes gleam. Instead of saying that is his, you say that is here's. And instead of saying he likes himself, you say Z likes herself. Moving on, so how to ask somebody for their pronouns. There's lots of different ways you can do that, but I find that the easiest is to ask, like, here's some like prompts, you know, what pronouns do you use, or how would you like me to refer to you? You know, the idea is to get the information you need to know how you refer to somebody, because you don't want to assume someone's pronouns. You should always ask instead of assuming, and how to do it in a respectful way. So in group settings, sometimes that's a little bit different than in a private setting. So the last prompts will work a little bit better. I mean, they can be used in a group setting or in a private setting, but it's a little bit better in a private setting. So if possible, always ask someone how to refer to them privately, you know, not in front of the whole class, not in front of a big group of people. And so it might also be helpful to ask how to refer to somebody in public versus in private. You know, some people maybe want to be out to you, but not out to other people. And if everybody's introducing them like themselves in an icebreaker, it's important to normalize having people say their pronouns, but not force anybody to. By forcing people to say their pronouns, and sometimes that outs people in a way that they don't want to be. You know, they don't want to say wrong pronouns for themselves, but they also want to create a culture. You want to create a culture where it's acceptable to say your pronouns. So if a few individuals share their pronouns, considering yours to normalize this, or like if you're starting an icebreaker, like, oh, say your name, your pronouns, you know, your grade, whatever else you want to add on to there. But if everybody's sharing their pronouns, maybe consider not sharing yours to allow a space for those who are not comfortable sharing theirs. Next little application. So think about sometime, just like in your head, think about something that you learned about someone that significantly changed your perception of them. Sometimes when we, you know, hear someone's pronouns, it can kind of change our perception of them. But there's lots of things that we hear that change our perceptions of people. And contrary to popular belief, learning someone's pronouns is not an act of pure memorization. And while it can seem to be, and sometimes it definitely helps to, you know, try to memorize it, try to remember it, attempting to just memorize often like leads to frequent misgendering. And instead, it's important to actually perceive someone as their affirmed gender. So if somebody comes up to you and says they use he, him pronouns, you think, as you perceive them as you would if you had to take a guess. You know, if you had to assume their pronouns, you would say she, her. But this student is particularly saying, I use he, him pronouns. You know, it's important to perceive them as whatever gender they identify as, because that will help you remember those pronouns. So some starting questions of why you may be like messing up pronouns, or maybe a great way to start to help you remember someone's pronouns is how do you perceive this person in general? And do you see them as their affirmed gender or their assigned gender at birth? And that's, you know, maybe a reason why that you keep messing up is because instead you're seeing them as their assigned gender at birth, or what you think that they should be assigned. Another question would be, why do you perceive them the way that you do? What about them is leading you to view them this way? And what traits that you associate with their affirmed gender can you focus on? And so basically by picking out a couple traits that you associate with their affirmed gender, it might make it a lot easier to, you know, remember their pronouns. I can definitely say from experience, you know, having friends, you know, change their pronouns, it's like the more you call someone their pronoun, the more likely you are to see them as their affirmed gender. So some do's and don'ts for pronouns. We'll start with the don'ts. So don't purposely misgender someone or use the wrong pronouns. That's considered pretty rude. You wouldn't do that for somebody from, like, if you consider them cisgender, you know, if you see, oh, you know, this person, I think they should use she, her pronouns, and they do use she, her pronouns, you wouldn't purposely misgender them. Don't publicly apologize for your mistakes, and an apology is different than a correction. So a lot of times the apology would be like, oh, I am so sorry, like, and you know, you stop class, you know, you're like, I'm so sorry that I misgendered you, you know. That can put the person that you misgendered in a really uncomfortable position. On the same hand, don't make a big deal out of it. You know, simply correct yourself, like, oh, he, oh, so sorry, she. You know, you don't have to make a big deal out of it to put the person, it makes the other person in an uncomfortable situation. Of course, never argue with someone over their pronouns. You know, you think that they should be using he, him pronouns, but they have repeatedly told you that they use she, her pronouns. You know, don't argue with them over that. That's not exactly the kindest thing to do. Don't make a big deal about using someone's pronouns. I know it can be hard to make a change, but you don't need to be like, oh, it's so difficult, it's just so hard. You know, that puts the other person in an uncomfortable situation because they're asking for something that you do every single day. That seems pretty basic. And I know that it can be hard to change someone's pronouns, but doing the work is also important. On the same thread, don't mention, how hard it is. And don't argue with someone about the grammar of their pronouns. Yes, they, them pronouns can sometimes be deemed not grammatically acceptable. So as we see, we do use it in our everyday lives anyways. On the other hand, here's some do's. So do ask for someone's pronouns instead of assuming. Do make it part of your introduction norms. Do attach your pronouns to your emails or to your communications in general. Do get used to saying your pronouns. Do try your best to remember someone's pronouns, and do allow for people to introduce themselves with their pronouns. In that same thread, you should try to use gender neutral language when you can. I know it can be difficult, and it takes thinking, and it takes work, and it takes constant correction of your actions, because a lot of us have been socialized to believe that we must say, like, that this is the proper way to say things, but there's totally so many alternatives. So instead of saying ladies and gentlemen, you can say honored guests or distinguished guests. You can also say everybody. That's one of my favorites. Instead of saying girlfriend, boyfriend, you can say partner. There's a whole list there of things that a lot of people wouldn't say, but you know, partner and significant other seem to be pretty good alternatives for gender neutral language. Boys, girls, ladies. Instead of saying that, you can say y'all, folks, people, guests. Instead of saying girl / boy or man or woman, you say person, human. In that same thread, there's lots of gendered language. While we aren't a gendered language such as like French or Spanish, we do have gendered words. And so instead of saying like mankind, you can say humankind. Instead of saying chair or chairman, you can say chair. Instead of saying congressman, say legislator. Instead of saying businessman, you can say representative. Instead of saying policeman, say police officer. Instead of saying landlord, say owner. Instead of saying boyfriend / girlfriend, you say partner. Instead of salesman, salesperson. Instead of men in power, workforce. Instead of maiden name, family name. Instead of fireman, firefighter. And instead of husband and or wife, you can say spouse. So yeah, like I said, it can be a little bit difficult, but you know, with the constant monitoring of your own language, it makes it a little bit easier. Now moving on to names. So a lot of transgender people have a name that is different than what was given to them at birth or is on their documents. And many trans people consider the name that was given to them at birth as their dead name, and they try to avoid using those names. And so by asking for someone's name, you can avoid assuming their name. A lot of ways we assume names is by looking at the ID or looking at your role, your roster, stuff like that. And so sometimes it's good to ask for names first. And you can do that as a part of your introductions as well if you do a little icebreaker. Some do's and don'ts. Do ask for someone's name and avoid using someone's dead name. Provide a space where people can state their own names and avoid reading off rosters, instead check off names. And I'll go into that a little bit in just a minute. Don't purposely use a person's dead name. Don't ask a person what their dead name is unless it is needed. There are circumstances in which, you know, people haven't legally changed name. A lot of college kids have not changed their name yet because it's very expensive to do. And so it's like they might go by a name on their email, on the roster and everything like that, but sometimes when it comes to filling out government paperwork or legal paperwork, it's good to put that requirement out there that you will be having to ask for their legal name. And don't require a legal name when it's not needed, you know, homework, presentations, or correspondences. Awesome. Okay. Now we're moving on to rosters. So at Pacific, rosters may reflect a student's dead name if it hasn't been legally changed. That's not always the case. There doesn't seem to be a across the board kind of thing going on. You know, it's like you could have your legal name set in 2 classes and your preferred name set in 3. You know, it's like, I don't know what determines it. We'll figure that out. So to prevent accidentally dead naming somebody by like calling out names and calling out roll, have students say their own full names and check them off as they go. That can take a little bit more work. So maybe consider sending out an email prior to class, prompting students to inform you of any nicknames not reflected on the roster. This could be in the form of like a survey or just a little email that's like, heads up, you know, email me if you go by a different name than this on the roster. And you can inform other faculty of students' names only if you have the student's consent. So, you know, don't go around telling all your best friends that, you know, oh, so-and-so changed their name. But hey, if the student says like, hey, I'm willing to be out to everybody, I don't mind if you tell other professors about my name, then feel free to. So some things that we try not to assume are pronouns, gender, sexuality, preferred bathroom, partner's gender, or parental makeup. You know, it's always good to ask for pronouns. It's good to ask for someone's, you could ask for their gender. You know, it's good just not assume it. You know, sexuality shouldn't be assumed either. You know, not everybody looks as you think that they should when should for their sexuality. Yeah, don't prefer or assume someone's preferred bathroom. You know, gender expression doesn't always equal gender identity. Don't assume a partner's gender. You know, not always do we date what you think we should. And don't assume parental makeup. You know, lots of people no longer follow the nuclear family. And so, yeah, it's definitely not a big deal in college, but definitely in high school, big deal. You know, everybody's like, oh, take us home to your mom and dad. It's like, well, not everybody has a mom and dad, you know. Some inappropriate questions would be like, who is the man of the relationship? You know, that doesn't exist in a lot of, you know, LGBT relationships. So what's in your pants? Do you have a blank? Inappropriate questions that you would not ask any other person, you know. Also goes with, how do you have sex? That's a very inappropriate question. You know, definitely it's not something you would ask a lot of people. So you were a boy/girl, not the nicest. And then have you had the surgery yet? Along with being vague, it is a little rude. So yeah, some questions to avoid. Yeah. So other phrases to avoid was when he was a she, when she was straight, the gay lifestyle, those people, you don't look/act gay, do you know other gay person, alternative family, my gay cousin said, I would never guess you're transgender, 2 genders/sexes, both/either genders, man and woman, transgenders. Just to go over a few, you know, like the phrase alternative family, that can be considered rude because there's no family that's alternative because every family is a family. I would have never guessed you're transgender. While that may be seen as a compliment, it's not very often taken as a compliment. Both/either genders, that assumes that there's just man and woman as the only genders that exist. And transgenders is grammatically incorrect. Transgender is an adjective, not, so it can't really be plural. So you say transgender people. Yeah. So one common thing I always hear is, I always seem to mess up. That's okay, we all make mistakes. So it's important to remember to not simply memorize someone's pronouns, as we talked about previously, connecting someone's pronouns to how you perceive them. Another important reason is to recognize why you mess up. This is a little introspection, you know, why have you been raised to perceive people that this way? Why have you been raised to perceive people with certain pronouns? And just think before you speak. So sometimes that can be a little bit difficult because, you know, not always do you think before you speak. And I mean, that's something they tell, you know, little kindergartners, think before you speak, you know, so I don't say rude things. But nowadays it's like you monitoring your language is a way that is really important to show that you care and respect for others. So a little brief blurb about syllabi. After this presentation, at the end of this presentation, I'll be sharing a little PDF that is how to create an inclusive classroom. And this is just a little overview of some ways to create an inclusive classroom that is also posted on this PDF that I'll be sharing. So yeah, consider adding a statement in support of diverse students. A lot of times this is a little copy and paste thing blurb that you put in the back of syllabi. That is great to have. Also consider making an effort to seek out articles / books written by diverse authors. Not always as applicable to every subject, but it can be in a lot of subjects. Consider adding a personal statement to show that you are invested in your students. This can be, instead of putting the copy and paste in the back of the syllabi, something on the front page that just says that you care for your students. You know, this can be done through adding a statement that you are open to talk to. And so just saying like, hey, these are when my office hours are, you can always feel free to come and talk to me, making yourself an accepting and welcoming person. And then the last one, adding more diverse topics if applicable. Like I said, this is not always available for all subjects, but you can add, you know, topics in about race, gender, anything like that. Even if you don't feel like it's super applicable to your topic, you can always, you know, maybe find articles that are by diverse authors instead. So not everything has to be written by a dead old white man, you know? Okay, if anybody has any questions, feel free type them or to speak up. And if you want me to go back and review anything, I'm also totally willing to do that. Yeah, also if there are any professors here, especially GSS professors, who would like to give any tips, something that they found useful in their classroom, totally feel free to type it in the chat and share with everybody or to speak aloud.
Can I just say one thing? My name is Amy, and I want to say, Joey, I appreciate you doing this training. This is a lot of information, and yeah, it's wonderful that you did this. My specialty is gender, sexuality, and the law, so I just did want to underscore some of the things that you have been saying in here. And I know that if there's anybody in here who studies psychology as well, right? Correct pronoun use is not just a kindness, but it's an imperative, because when we use the incorrect pronouns to refer to people, it can contribute to suicidality, which is you know, incredibly harmful for people, and for younger people, that risk increases. And as people who work with a contingent of younger people, that's just something to be aware of. So I'm really incredibly grateful that you're doing this training.
Of course, thank you. Thank you for definitely speaking up.
Yeah, Joey, I just want to thank you as well, just echoing what Amy said. My name is Anil Uman, and I'm the interim director on the Eugene campus for the School of Learning and Teaching. And one of the areas that I focused on is creating identity-safe classrooms in K through 12 education. And I also do trainings around comprehensive sexuality education, which, of course, gender identity is a huge part of that. So thank you so much for doing this.
Of course. We had a question in the chat that said, is it common to use they And some other pronouns are not he/her. I'm somewhat limited in my experience, and I've not talked to anybody who used those yet. Yeah. So while not a lot of people use, you know, Z or AM pronouns, not as common. A lot of students do use they/them pronouns. Not always that maybe they are willing to share with you. Unfortunately, you know, a lot of students are very scared of what their classmates will say, what the professors will say if they come up to them. You say they/them pronouns, they're afraid that the pronouns won't be respected, or that by say that their teacher just simply won't use their pronouns. But it is pretty common. I would say I know quite a few people. Of course, my social circle seems to be, of course, filled with people who tend to use they/them pronouns, as those are the people I tend to make friends with. But I would say it's pretty common, yeah. Yeah, okay, so we'll do had a question in the chat that says, notice the term freshman / freshman was not included in the list of gender specific terms. I totally agree. Yeah, we totally could use first year students, and that is very inclusive to a lot of people, especially to people who maybe have alternative education paths as well than the standard, you know, go straight from high school right into college. Yeah, that's why definitely it's important that, you know, we use the idea like first year seminar instead of freshman seminar, you know, removing that gendered language from outside of our dialogue. We had another question that says, I was wondering if we could talk briefly about inclusive spelling alternatives as well, slashes, such as women spelled with an X at, after the like WOMEX or XN and FOLX for folks. Yes, so totally I understand where this is coming from. Lots of people have taken it up and other people are against it. I would say most people are totally for it. It definitely removes a lot of the time the gender or like the assumed gender in it. So like saying for a woman, you know, has the word man inside of it. So yes, these are terms that are used, and I would say most people do accept them. There are, of course, discourse against it, but if you want to use it, I think pretty much everybody will accept it. We definitely use it a lot in CG for some of our programs. Yes, these slides, so this is being recorded. And this is another question. It's asking if you guys can get access to slides. This is being recorded and it will be posted on the website underneath trainings. And then also I can make these shareable. So yes. Awesome. So yeah, why is the K in folks an issue / gendered? Not exactly sure if that's the issue as much as just saying folks with an X creates a more inclusive idea. If anybody has anything to say about that, if they have any background information in the issue, I would love to hear your thoughts.
I just put a link in the chat.
Awesome, thank you so much. Awesome. Yeah. Is it okay, Amy, if I read out that little paragraph that you got from the article?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Yes, please. Also, just wanted to point out, I didn't want to copy paste too much, but the person who's talking about this is a linguist.
Perfect. Yeah, so Amy put a little quote into the group chat that I'll read aloud. It says, folks is kind of brilliant. Even with the usual spelling of FOLKS, folks is an inclusive word avoiding the gender association of guys, dudes, and other male associated words. The X retains the traditional pronunciation, but opens the tent wider. Zimmerman praises this word for suggestive solidarity and representing the everyday people. Society has a long way to go, but maybe someday we can all just be folks. So yes, thank you, Amy, for sharing that. I think that is really important. I definitely agree with the idea of the suggested solidarity. Um, yeah, so if someone is not respecting someone else's pronouns, that can be a very tricky situation because, of course, you never want to put either person in an uncomfortable situation. A lot of times it is good to simply approach someone and be like, hey, just so you know, it doesn't have to be a face-to-face approach. This can also be via email or via note. I'm like, hey, I noticed that you weren't respecting so-and-so's pronouns. I would appreciate it as well. I know they would as well. If you respect their pronouns, it's also going to just be a quick correction as well. If somebody says he, or you're like, oh, they go by they, them pronouns. You know, just a quick correction that hopefully doesn't make anybody feel uncomfortable. But if they are blatantly refusing to respect someone's pronouns, I mean, you can try educating them, but also it's not your job to educate them in any way. So it can be a little bit difficult, but hopefully with a quick correction or a simple note, email, or face-to-face, you can get a correction out of it. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then I think we'll move on to the next section. Oh, yeah. Okay. Since pronouns are generally used in the third person, would using a person's name be another way to refer to a person? Totally. Yeah. Sometimes it can be hard to remove pronouns from our language, but it can be useful if you don't know someone's pronouns. Also, a pretty accepted general rule is if you don't know someone's pronouns, use they, them pronouns. You know, that way you're not putting assuming a gender to them because they, them is normally considered the gender neutral alternative. Yes, I think it's important, Amy, also to acknowledge that some people avoid pronouns completely and only use their names. So instead you would simply, it can be clunky, but it's not too hard to do. You know, it's like, oh, have you seen Joey? Yeah, I saw Joey earlier. Joey was heading to the cafeteria, you know? Yeah, any further questions? Feel free to keep typing in the chat. Okay, well, I think I'm going to move on. You can also always ask any questions at the end of this slideshow. And if you don't think of any, you know, right now while we're doing this presentation, of course, you can ask them either via email later. So, yeah. Okay, so next we're going to be moving on to the importance of why you should use someone's pronouns, create an inclusive classroom, things such as that. So we're going to start with a self-reflection activity. So I will type these in the chat, but I'm going to send you guys into breakout rooms. I know it's a little scary. And simply you're going to talk about what is your first memory of your gender, and how often do you think of your gender? So, yeah. Think about those while I type these in the chat, and then I'll boot y'all to some breakout rooms. You can chat amongst yourself. And then when you come back, feel free to share anything that you found that you really stood out to you in your breakout rooms. If nothing stood out, you don't have to share. It's okay. Awesome. Okay, I'll see you back here in about 2 to 3 minutes.
Hey, Joey.
Yes.
Thanks for putting this on. I've got to run because I've got something that came up. So unfortunately, I'm not going to participate in the last part.
You're
But
good.
thanks for putting this on. This is awesome.
Of course. Glad you came.
Peace.
Bye.
If you want, I'm also comfortable leading the next one.
Yeah, perfect. Do you want to do that?
Yeah. I also don't know if you think it would be like weird for people to all of a sudden be like, hey, this is this person that wasn't here at the beginning. They're just going to like take over.
No, I'll totally introduce you. I would love to hear your comments when I invite everybody to come back and share their opinions. I'd love to hear your comments as well as we hear them rolling in. So,
For sure.
Yeah. I love your hair. Looks good.
Thank you. I just dyed it a little bit ago. And now I get to, look extra queer for this presentation.
Exactly. That's the best way to look.
Truly.
Awesome. I just closed the breakout room, so they should be coming back.
Cool. Yeah, slowly but surely.
Okay, awesome. Welcome back. So I'd like to introduce my colleague, Nikolai. And so they will be helping me present the rest of this presentation with some of these activities. They definitely helped me create this slideshow and especially these activities. So yeah, they'll just be helping with some little facilitation. And yeah, they're a student at the Hillsborough campus. So yeah. Okay. So if you all want to, you are free to share either aloud or in the chat some of the things that you discussed. Yeah, so we had Anita share that that their first memory, or her first memory, is how her mother used to dress her in very girlish clothes and dresses, girls' dresses. Yeah, that's definitely a very important first memory. A lot of times our first memory of gender is very young, and oftentimes pressed upon us by others. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of good things coming in. What stood out to me definitely is Carrie's comment. She said that her first memory of gender was when first memories of gender were all when I didn't follow the gender rules or when the rules didn't make sense. Example, having to wear a dress to school, cutting my hair short, and being asked if I was boy or girl, etc. I 100% agree, and I have a lot of those same memories. I felt like when gender first stood out to me was when everybody thought I was playing the wrong gender role, you know?
Yeah, my first memory of gender too, I was thinking about this, was in kindergarten or preschool, and there was, this boy in our class who really liked to wear dresses, and I just distinctly remember that was perceived as really wrong, and like, even though the teacher wasn't intending to like actively shame this kid for doing that, it was like this big faux pas that we were all aware of, that like, oh, well, boys aren't supposed to do that. So yeah, I think that a lot of it is absolutely like when we transgress these norms is when we become really aware of them.
Yeah, Amy, read out your comment real quick. Amy said, after I got chicken pox, my mom cut my hair very short. I was constantly assumed to be a boy and prevented from entering women-only spaces like dressing rooms. I think that's really important and definitely creates a distinction between gender expression and gender identity, and how sometimes those other ones, how people perceive your gender expression can prevent you from going into spaces where your gender identity says that you should be.
Right. Oh, wow. Yeah, I think that's Sarah's example is really interesting because it also shows, I don't know, just how harmful, like literally and physically, right? Sometimes gender roles can be where it's like you're allergic to this adhesive. It's honestly not that big of a deal, right? If people know as a baby if you're, a boy or a girl, but it's this performance and the pressure to put it on. Yeah, thank you for sharing the article, Amy. Is there anything anybody else wants to add, or do we feel like we're ready to move on to activity number 2? If we're doing that one.
Yep, I'll plan on it. Awesome. Okay, we'll move right along. So the activity 2, we will also put out into some breakout rooms, get to talk to peers. So this is, you don't have to grab a paper and pencil, you can also do this on your computer. Basically, you're going to create 3 boxes / columns labeled masculine, feminine, and androgynous. And underneath these labels, you're going to write a list of items and activities that you deem that fit that label. So yeah, I'll give you a few minutes to think, maybe start brainstorming, writing, and then I'll put you out into some breakout rooms. and then you can share it with your groups. It'll be the same breakout rooms as before.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the intention behind this is to foster some disagreement potentially. So it's not necessarily about what's typical or what you would, personally consider to be masculine, feminine, androgynous. It could be a mix of both. You could just choose to, do like the stereotypes, or you could just choose to do your own perspective. It's really open to your interpretation.
Cal, Tyler, it's good to see you. This is our last little activity before we are moving on to the personal story section. So I'm going to cut this one probably a little short just because we're a little close on time, this activity. But don't be afraid to share your story. I'm sure a lot of professors won't be afraid to stay over. So. We'll give everybody just a few more seconds to come back from the breakout rooms, and then we'll resume. Okay, awesome. Welcome back, everybody. So yeah, you've created those little boxes. Hopefully you wrote something down. So next we're gonna try to create a little creative collaborative list of these items. So if you guys want to start, if y'all want to start sharing either verbally or in the chat some of these ideas, I would love to hear them. So first we're gonna start with the gender neutral box. So what are some things that you all decided were gender neutral or androgynous?
80s new wave bands slash music.
Yeah.
Nice. I like it. High fashion aesthetics for models. And then, yeah, pretty much everything is gender neutral. All right. Driving, but also not everywhere, right? In some places, it's not necessarily considered to be a gender neutral activity. Or, you know, even though everybody can technically drive in the US and has access to that, there are still a lot of stereotypes about who's a better driver and who isn't, and who should be, you know, doing these jobs. Or singing, okay, as gender neutral. And then, oh, we have wearing pants, gender neutral. Drinking, okay. We got a lot. What about, okay, it looks like somebody put something for masculine, so we can kind of go to the masculine category first. Gamers and YouTubers are considered to be more masculine, potentially. Anything else?
I know it can be kind of hard and kind of awkward to like, oh, I don't want to prescribe something as masculine because that's kind of counterproductive of this whole, you know, idea of creating a gender inclusive space. But it's important to realize what things that we deem as masculine and or feminine, to recognize, you know, why we think that way, and kind of introspective, like how we can change our ideas.
Truck driver, facial hair / shaving. Yeah, red meat. That's, yeah, there's a lot of gendered stuff with food, right? Like beer is more masculine and wine is more feminine, you know. Football mechanics. Dirt masculine, flowers feminine. That's really interesting too. Yeah. Right, like certain smells. Yeah. Cigars, true. Judges, yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Heels used to be considered masculine, but now they're considered feminine.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, a big part of this exercise, I did see a lot of people in chat saying it was hard or uncomfortable. And that's definitely the point, that we're going to disagree. Some of us are going to disagree on a lot of these things. And a lot of these perceptions are not only culturally bound, but bound by ourselves, our own gender schemas. And while it's easy to say that everything is gender neutral, you know, and like nothing is gendered, realistically, if you're being honest with yourself, like you do view certain things as potentially more gendered. And even I, as like a non-binary person, do, because that's what I was taught. And it's like, yeah, you're unlearning it and you want to unlearn it. But this plays into trans identity because you're like, you know, you're taking a look at the people around you and you're gendering them based off certain things that they're doing or certain behaviors that they have. So that's really important to acknowledge.
Yeah, okay, I think we're gonna move on to feminine real quick.
Yes. Home cooking is feminine, like Amy said, but most chefs are cis men. So like professional cooking is masculine, but home cooking is feminine, yeah. Makeup, teachers, showing emotion, nurses, you know. The pink professions, nurses and teachers, yep. Parenting, yeah, that's considered to be very feminine. Dental assistants. Yeah, just assistants in general, right? Whether it's dental, admin, anything. Manis and petties, yeah, or like any kind of self-care. If it's physical, right? Like bathing is kind of considered to be feminine, which is why you have all these commercials being like, smell like a man.
Amy, would you like to go into detail what third shift means?
So I said that, and I see you already have parenting and things like that. So the third shift is sort of that feminist idea, right? That when many like women come home from work, they start their third shift of parenting and all those other tasks that happen, right? Taking care of the home.
Perfect. Thank you.
Emotional labor. Yeah, that's another big one. Some more emotional stuff is considered to be feminine.
Okay, well, I think we're gonna, talking a little bit more about why we, created this list. We're just gonna move on real quick. Thank you so much for participating, though. It's so important that, you guys are up here talking about all this. So yeah, that keeps all your stuff there. Let me read that.
That's good to know, though.
Yes, it is. Okay.
Well, if anything, I can just read the questions.
Yeah.
So, why do we think this is a big one to consider? Are there differences in perceptions and why? Which again, kind of touches into the culturally bound idea of gender, that it's not universal everywhere, right? How can these biases be harmful and limiting? And how did this activity make you feel? And I feel like we did touch on a lot of those actually throughout the process of this, especially with, people kind of coming in and being like, wow, this is really difficult. I'm sure it made some of you uncomfortable.
Yeah. So these are more introspection questions. You definitely don't have to share aloud, but, just think to yourself, like, obviously the activity was hard, and why was it hard? And these are the questions to guide your thinking, Okay, so next we're going to move on to some personal stories. So we had some students join as you all were in your breakout rooms, and I just invited them to come and share why, in like 2 to 3 minutes, why is this so important, why teachers should create inclusive classrooms, and or share a story of a professor who created an inclusive classroom and why it was so important. So do we have any volunteers to start, or?
We'll go in.
Nikolai.
So I've had a lot of experiences with gender in the classroom, especially being a non-binary person. And, that's, I feel like, really uncomfortable for a lot of people to come into contact with somebody who uses different pronouns. But definitely the best experience I had was with a professor who really leveled with us and was just like, hey, like, I know some of you, I know that there are at least 3 trans students here, and I've gotten some really weird messages from faculty about how to handle this. What's your take on it? And really opened up a space for us to get to basically tell her, like, this is what we want, this is what we need, and give us give us our input. There we go. Anyway, and I think that that's honestly a really good way to go, which sometimes can kind of cross into being like, oh, I don't want to put the emotional labor on my students, but at the same time, it's really nice just being asked and feeling like you really get to kind of make the rules around your own identity, and you get to be given a voice and get to decide how to handle stuff.
Yeah, I can go next. Yeah, I think it's really important for professors and teachers to create an inclusive classroom because it allows all your students to feel like they're in an accepting and welcoming place. If we're thinking like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, thinking about like what you need first to become a successful student, that's not super Maslow's, but my idea is like you need acceptance first, an idea like you're accepted in a safe place. So that way that is not something you're constantly thinking or worrying about while you're trying to like learn. That your professor is going to be accepting, that your professor is going to use the right pronouns for you, your professor is going to advocate for you if another student in the class is not respecting you. That can be such a welcoming and like warming idea that it creates such a better bond between the student and professor, but also just with your connections to the class because you have so much less on your mind. For me personally, I had a professor, he was definitely not exactly hip with the times. He's trying his best. And he definitely acknowledged that. He's like, I'm going to mess up, and that's okay because I always want to correct myself. And I was like, of course, as long as you correct yourself and I know that you're making an effort to try to do better, then that's okay. And I'm so glad that you are doing this personal, like, you're working on yourself personally. And yes, that means that you are going to mess up sometimes, because you're working on yourself, and that's the best you can do, like for yourself and for others, is to work on yourself. So whenever he messed up in class about my pronouns, he'd always like email me after class or like talk to me after class. He's like, I'm so sorry. He'd make a correction in the moment, but then he'd later, go on and apologize to me privately. He's like, I'm so sorry that I made a mistake. I'm working on it and I want to do better. And that just meant a lot because he was putting forth so much effort for like my own comfort. It meant so much to me.
Yeah, I can share my story next. Oh, sorry, I'm hearing an echo. But I also identify as non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. And I came into Pacific my freshman year just really nervous about being out about my identity. But the very first class I had, just the first time I'd ever been in college, my professor had us all introduce ourselves to the class and specifically asked for our pronouns. And that just completely blew me away. I'd never been asked for my pronouns by a professor before. And just even 3 years now, just anytime a professor makes that very small effort to just acknowledge that different pronouns exist and not everyone is the gender they necessarily present as, it just makes me feel very seen and appreciative.
I can go as well. So I transitioned during high school from female to male, and I noticed a lot of differences from teacher to teacher and how people reacted to certain situations. And I always really appreciated it when there were teachers and faculty and other students who actually put forward the effort to ask questions, not necessarily intrusive questions, but things along the lines of, what are your pronouns again? Whether they forgot them or they had never been told in the first place. And it was always really affirming when people were willing to maybe go through that sort of awkwardness that may be there to actually care to know. I think it was my junior year, my English teacher, I was very open about being trans in the class, but it became obvious to me very quick that she couldn't remember what my pronouns were. And I was too non-confrontational to be like, hey, by the way, this is it, because I was so nervous about it at the time. And I really had wished for a long time that she had come up to me and just been like, hey, I don't know what to say. Can you tell me what to say? Things along those lines are always really helpful. And a lot of times students are too nervous to ask because it can be very scary to do so. And to put forward that effort, especially when someone may be too nervous to do so themselves, is always very helpful.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you all for speaking up. Does anybody else want to speak up? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I know that we are coming close to the 1250 mark. So I am going to quickly share with you the inclusive classroom PDF, and we will after that we'll go over questions. That way, if anybody has to leave, I understand, and you will feel free to. I'm gonna have to stop sharing for just a second. Okay. So here is the inclusive classroom PDF. Basically, this just goes over whatever you would need to create an inclusive classroom. This will be posted with the slideshow. I can also send out a link real quick in the chat so you can have access to it right now if you would like. But I will post it along with the slides and the slideshow. So yeah, it just goes over exactly what we basically covered today. So I'm not going to read through it real quick just because it basically is almost verbatim from the slideshow today. So yes. Only other thing I have definitely to share before y'all leave, unless anybody wants to stay for questions, is I would love if you all could fill out this survey that I'm going to send out to you. It's really quick, and it's just a survey about the training that we did today. So yeah, just a Qualtrics. That is not, is that it? No, I don't think that's the right one. Give me 1 second, I'll send out the right link. Okay. Here you go. Oh, I just sent it twice, never mind, okay.
Oh, there we go, yeah. It just blended in.
Okay. So now if you all, oh, here's something that you can do right before you leave. Here are like the basically things that are included in the Inclusive Classroom PDF. It is things that you can do right now that will be super easy in how to create an inclusive classroom, and that is add your pronouns to your email signature, change your syllabi to be more inclusive, and to create a space to share pronouns and preferred names using the things that we talked about earlier. Yeah, so now we are open to questions. Any questions about the entire slideshow? So anything you guys have any questions about? Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm so sorry if you do not have access. Let me change that real quick to the PDF. Okay, we'll try that one. Oh, that is not this one. Awesome. Also, keep sending in questions if you have questions about anything that we covered. Also, thank you to everybody who is sending the nice comments in the chat. Any general questions and or comments? Do you have any comments, you know, about anything that you saw today that you'd like to talk about? Any of the questions that we talked about? I know we kind of skimmed over the questions at the end of the like gender boxes activity. So if you have any comments from that, anything more things you want to share about the first time your gender, or maybe how often you want to think about your gender, any questions that you've had for a while that you just like, oh, I've never had a place to ask it. This might be the time and place. So. Nancy asked, are there similar trainings on gender and sexuality available for our students? Not yet. No, that is something that I am totally wanting to do. But yeah, there's not really anything like that right now, but they're always free to, you know, ask CGE, or they can get a copy of this PowerPoint or any other resources that they are interested in. The CGE website has quite a few resources on it as well. Tyler mentioned that last year there was a thing about pronouns during the first year orientation, and that is true too. Well, if none of you have any questions, you are free to go, of course. And if you want to stay to ask questions afterwards, I will be on. I mean, I don't really have anywhere to be until like 2:45. So I'm free just to stay here. We can just chat if you would like. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask more privately, you are free to email me at my email at the bottom of this slide.